He was already falling when he realized they had dropped him over the wrong country. Not France, not the fields of Normandy. Germany. At least that's what his gut told him when the muzzle flashes erupted from 3 directions below, stitching tracer fire across the black sky like a zipper being yanked open. Private First Class Thomas "Tommy" Caldwell, 82nd Airborne Division, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 22 years old, former coal miner from Harlan County, Kentucky, a man who had survived cave-ins, who understood what it meant when the ground above you turned against you. He understood nothing about what was happening right now. His chute had deployed. That was good. Every other man in his stick, gone, swallowed by the smoke and darkness and chaos. That was not good. The ground below was not grass. It was water. If he hit that flooded field at full descent speed, the chute would drown him before a single German bullet could. Tommy had exactly 11 seconds to figure out how to survive a landing the Army had never trained him for. He started counting.
Rewind 4 hours. England, airfield C-47 transport plane, engine roar. 500 paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne Division, sitting in metal bucket seats, their faces darkened with camouflage grease, their bodies loaded with over 90 pounds of equipment, rifles, mortars, radios, rations, maps, grenades, and the desperate, nameless weight of knowing what night this was. June 5th, 1944, transitioning into June 6th, D-Day. Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in the history of human warfare, was less than 5 hours from execution. While 150,000 Allied soldiers prepared to storm the beaches, it was the paratroopers who had to go first. Into the dark, into the unknown, into a German-occupied France that had been fortified, mined, flooded, and garrisoned with divisions of hardened Wehrmacht infantry. Tommy sat third from the door. He looked at the men around him. Sergeant Ray DeLuca, Brooklyn, New York, former boxer, 26 years old, jaw set like concrete, eyes forward. Private Hector Morales, San Antonio, Texas, 19 years old, the youngest man in the stick. He was quietly moving his lips, not prayer, Tommy knew. He was reciting baseball statistics. It's how he calmed himself. Corporal James Scotty McAllister, Aberdeen, Scotland, British liaison, the only man in the aircraft who'd actually seen combat before. He said nothing. He hadn't said anything for 3 hours. The jump master appeared at the door, goggles up, oxygen mask off. 6 minutes, he shouted over the engine thunder. Tommy checked his reserve chute, checked his rifle, checked the cricket, the small metal clicker that would serve as a recognition signal in the dark, because in pitch-black Normandy, you needed something other than a face to determine if the man stepping toward you was a friend or someone about to kill you. 1 click, 2 clicks back. Friend. Silence. Enemy. The plane shuddered. Flak. They were already in the kill zone, and they hadn't even jumped yet.
Here is what the Allied planners knew, and what they chose not to tell the men inside those planes. The 82nd Airborne's designated drop zones, carefully marked on maps in London, analyzed by intelligence officers, color-coded and approved, had been positioned in the Merderet River Valley, flat ground, good for assembling units after the chaos of a night drop. What the aerial photographies had not captured, what no photograph could capture from altitude, was that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had ordered the valley deliberately flooded months earlier. He understood airborne tactics. He had fought paratroopers in North Africa. He knew they needed ground to assemble on. So he took the ground away. The Merderet River, normally a modest stream, had been dammed at multiple points. The surrounding farmland, the drop zones of the 82nd Airborne, was now underwater. In some places ankle deep, in others 8 feet deep. In darkness, a paratrooper loaded with 90 pounds of equipment could not tell the difference until he was already sinking. Rommel had also deployed something else. Rommel Spargle. Erwin's asparagus, wooden poles, 10, 12, 15 feet tall, driven into every open field in Normandy.
each pole crowned with a mine or a shell casing wired to explode on contact, designed specifically to shred parachutes, to snap spines, to turn a glider landing into an instant catastrophe. And atop all of this, there was the Flak. As the Allied transport fleet crossed the Normandy coast at 0118 hours on June 6th, German anti-aircraft batteries opened fire. The C-47s, flying in tight formation designed for precision drops, immediately broke apart, pilots diving, banking, accelerating, every regulation speed and altitude for a proper drop abandoned in the desperate animal need to survive. Men were jumping from the wrong altitude, wrong speed, wrong position. The sticks, the carefully planned sequences of paratroopers who were supposed to land within 300 yards of each other, were instead scattered across an area the size of a small country. Some men landed in trees, some in water, some on rooftops right in the middle of German-occupied villages. Some men were dead before they hit the ground, their chutes caught by tracer fire, their bodies arriving on French soil already finished. And some men like Tommy Caldwell, landed exactly nowhere the plan had intended. The plan was dead before a single boot touched French soil.
Tommy hit the water. Not a landing, an impact. The cold, that was the first thing. The Normandy flooding was not pond water sitting in June warmth. It was ditch water, drainage water, channeled through earthen berms for months, carrying the cold of the Norman earth in it like a living thing. He went under. 91 pounds of equipment, rifle, ammunition, demolition kit, rations, entrenching tool, gas mask, reserve chute, did exactly what 91 pounds of equipment does in water. It pulled him down. The parachute billowed behind him, the silk canopy catching water instead of air, draping itself over him like a wet shroud, its lines tangling around his left arm and torso. He had trained for this, the Normandy flooding. The jump school instructors at Fort Benning had drilled it. Canopy release, find your bearings, establish your position, 3 steps, clean, sequential, manageable. None of that applied to pitch darkness, 6 feet of water, and a parachute actively trying to kill you. Tommy's right hand found the canopy release. He hit it. Nothing. He hit it again, harder. The chute released on the left, not the right. He was tangled differently than trained. The lines on the right side had wrapped. He clawed at them with both hands, his lungs burning, his boots finding no bottom, the weight of his equipment dragging him sideways in the water. He thought about the mine shaft, the 1939 collapse in Harlan County, the 6 hours underground in total darkness with water rising. He had survived that by being absolutely pathologically calm, by working the problem one piece at a time. He found the line with his left hand, followed it to the tangle, worked it counterclockwise, 3 loops, pulled. He broke the surface, gasping, and immediately heard German voices. He was free of the chute. He was not free of anything else. 20 yards to his left, perhaps 25, flashlights, 3 of them, sweeping across the water, a German patrol, moving along what appeared to be an earthen berm that ran through the flooded field. They were moving at a jog, searching the water, the sky, the darkness. They hadn't seen him yet. Tommy went still, mouth closed, breathing through his nose in controlled, measured cycles, his head barely above the surface. The beams passed over him. One of the Germans said something, a short, sharp word. The lights stopped, reversed. They had seen something. Tommy reached for his M1A1 carbine, the folding stock model issued to paratroopers, and found it gone. The sling had snapped in the water. His primary weapon was somewhere on the bottom of a flooded Norman field. He had his .45 pistol. He had a combat knife. He had 1 fragmentation grenade. There were 3 of them, and they were walking directly toward him. If you've ever wondered what real courage looks like stripped down to nothing, no backup, no weapon, no plan, keep watching. This is that moment.
The German patrol was a Feldgendarmerie unit, military police, attached to the 91st Infantry Division, which had been repositioned to Normandy just weeks earlier on Rommel's direct order. An intelligence analyst in London had flagged the movement. The report had reached Chafe. It had not, for reasons lost to history, reached the men of the 82nd Airborne in time to change the drop plan. So here they were. The patrol leader, Unteroffizier Klaus Brandt, 31 years old, veteran of the Eastern Front, a man who had survived Stalingrad by developing an instinct for things that were wrong, stopped on the berm. Something was wrong. He could not articulate it. The surface of the water in that section of the field was too still. There were ripples moving away from a point, not toward it as a frog or a water rat would create, but away as if something large had recently disturbed the surface and was now stationary. He raised his hand. The two soldiers behind him stopped. He clicked off his flashlight. In the darkness, both men held their breath. Tommy, 10 meters away, watched the flashlights go dark and felt every hair on his body stand up. A German who turned off his flashlight was a German who was looking with his ears. Tommy was breathing through his nose, slow, controlled, but the water around his face was moving, barely, a centimeter of ripple with each exhale radiating outward on the still surface. He stopped exhaling. He held his breath. Brandt listened. He heard wind. He heard distant artillery, the bombers, he assumed, though something in the volume troubled him. He heard nothing in the water ahead. He clicked his light back on, swung it across the field. The beam passed over Tommy's head by 4 inches. Brandt moved on. Tommy exhaled, slowly, silently, then allowed himself 3 full seconds of trembling before he clamped it down and started working the problem. He needed to get out of the water. He needed to find his unit. He needed to find the objective, the causeway at La Fière, which the 505th PIR was tasked with seizing and holding to prevent German armor from reaching the beaches. La Fière was approximately 3 kilometers northeast. He had no map. It had been in the cargo pack on his leg, which had torn free during the jump. He had no radio. He had a compass. Northeast. He began moving through the water, one hand extended forward, feeling for depth changes, moving in absolute silence, each footstep placed with deliberate care on the unseen bottom. He had moved perhaps 40 meters when he heard the sound that every paratrooper behind enemy lines prayed to hear on a night drop. Click. One click. He froze, reached into his breast pocket, found the cricket. Click, click. A pause. 5 seconds, 10. Then, from the darkness to his right, close enough that he could hear the water moving. "Don't shoot, for the love of God, don't shoot." The accent was Texan. Heck Morales was alive. Tommy had never been so happy to hear baseball statistics in his life. They found each other in the water, both soaked, both weapons intact in Heck's case, both with no idea where they were. Heck had landed on the edge of the flooded zone and crawled in rather than risk the open ground. He had his M1 Garand, he had his bayonet, he had 2 grenades and a full bandolier of 30 caliber ammunition. "Where's DeLuca?" Tommy whispered. "Dunno. Saw his chute go sideways when we hit the flak. Lost him." "Scotty?" Heck shook his head. 2 men, no map, 1 rifle, 1 pistol, 3 kilometers of occupied Normandy between them and their objective. This is where the real story begins.
They found the first road at 0215 hours, a narrow Norman lane bordered by the hedgerows that the French called bocage, dense, ancient barriers of earth and root and thorn that rose 6, 8, 10 feet high, creating a labyrinth that no map adequately described. The bocage of Normandy had stood for centuries. It was about to become one of the most lethal terrain features in the history of modern warfare. Tommy and Heck crouched at the lane's edge and listened. Distant gunfire, multiple directions. Some of it was the sharp crack of American M1s, distinctive, unmistakable. Some of it was the deeper, faster sound of German MG-42 machine guns, capable of firing over 1,000 rounds per minute, a sound that veterans described as tearing canvas or ripping silk. The 82nd was scattered across 30 miles of Normandy countryside, fighting in dozens of tiny, disconnected engagements, each group of survivors finding each other by cricket click and whisper, assembling into ad hoc combat units from different regiments, different divisions, different armies, and simply fighting. Tommy and Heck moved along the hedgerow, staying in the shadow of the bocage, heading northeast by compass.
The village appeared without warning. One moment, open field. The next, stone buildings, a church steeple, narrow cobbled streets, a Norman hamlet unnamed on the maps Tommy no longer possessed. And through the windows of the largest building, what appeared to have been a farmhouse before the Germans requisitioned it, orange light, voices, the smell of tobacco and coffee. A German command post. Tommy counted the vehicles outside. 2 Kubelwagens, 1 motorcycle, a field telephone wire running from the building to a pole at the lane's edge. He looked at Heck. Heck looked at him. The wire. If that wire connected to anything important, an artillery battery, a command element, a unit that was currently positioning to counter the beach landings, cutting it mattered. Every minute of communication disruption mattered. They had not been dropped into this nightmare at random. They were soldiers. They had a mission. Not the Fière mission anymore. They were too isolated for that. But this they could do. "Cover me," Tommy said. He drew his combat knife. He moved along the building's stone wall, each footstep on cobblestones placed as carefully as the water crossings. Heel first, outer edge, no scrape. 6 meters. 4. 2. The wire ran along the base of the wall at knee height. He reached it. The door of the farmhouse opened. Tommy pressed himself flat against the wall, knife behind his leg, a shadow among shadows. A German soldier stepped out. Young, 19 perhaps, 20. He was rebuttoning his jacket, squinting against the night air, walking towards the lane, walking towards the pole, walking towards Tommy. 5 meters. 4. 3. The soldier stopped, pulled out a cigarette, cupped his hands around it. The lighter flared. In the half-second of light, his eyes caught something against the wall, the shape of a man. He opened his mouth. Heck's rifle butt connected with the back of his skull from behind. Heck had moved along the opposite wall, circling in the dark, reading the situation before Tommy even registered the soldier's movement. The German crumpled without a sound. Tommy cut the wire in 3 places. They moved. 30 seconds later, the farmhouse door opened again. 2 soldiers emerged, arguing in low voices. One pointed at the fallen man. The other began shouting. By then, Tommy and Heck were already back in the bocage, moving northeast, moving fast, the alarm rising behind them like a stone dropped in water, ripples spreading outward, reaching the German command structure, triggering a search that would complicate the next hour in ways neither of them could predict. They had cut a wire. They had no idea what they just disrupted. What the wire connected to, the fire direction center of a German artillery battery positioned to target Utah Beach. The battery, 4 105mm howitzers capable of devastating the landing craft approaching the shore, had been awaiting the fire mission order when the line went dead. The delay in re-establishing communication, 47 minutes. The number of American landing craft that reached Utah Beach during those 47 minutes without artillery fire, hundreds. Tommy Caldwin and Hector Morales never knew any of this. They were already gone. 2 paratroopers, 1 cut wire, hundreds of American lives. They had no idea. And the worst was still ahead. Don't touch that screen. They heard Fière before they saw it. The sound was unmistakable, the concentrated, sustained thunder of close-quarters combat, not distant skirmishing, not single shots. This was the full, terrible orchestra of a contested position. Machine guns, rifle fire, grenades detonating in sequence, men shouting in 2 languages, the percussive crack of a bazooka round finding its target. 03:47 hours. Dawn was still 90 minutes away, but the eastern horizon had begun to differentiate itself from the sky, a faint, almost imperceptible brightening that the soldiers who noticed it knew meant the battle clock was accelerating. Darkness was the paratroopers' ally. Dawn made them targets. Tommy and Heck reached the ridge overlooking the Fière causeway at 03:51 hours. What they saw stopped them cold. The causeway, a narrow road crossing the flooded Merderet River, was approximately 60 meters long. On the far side, a stone manor house, the Manoir de la Fière, now a German strongpoint. On the near side, a collection of American paratroopers, assembled from at least 3 different regiments, dug in behind a stone wall and a small embankment. Tommy counted American figures, perhaps 40, perhaps 50, impossible to tell in the dark and smoke. The Germans in the manor had a machine gun emplacement in an upper window. Every time the Americans attempted to advance across the causeway, the gun drove them back. 3 men had already tried. 3 men were down in the causeway.
Tommy recognized the figure at the Americans' position center, a big man moving between positions, coordinating, calm in a way that seemed almost unnatural given what was happening around him. Colonel Mark Alexander, or possibly, he couldn't be certain, it was Lieutenant Colonel Ben Vandervoort, who had jumped with the 505th on a broken ankle and was commanding his battalion while refusing evacuation. The detail didn't matter. What mattered was that the men needed that machine gun silenced, and nobody could get to it from the front. Tommy looked at the terrain. The flooded Merderet to the south, the hedgerows running along the western bank, a stone wall at the edge of the manor's garden running from the bocage to within 30 feet of the building's side window. Not the front door, the side. "Tommy," he said, "I see it. Can you swim?" "I'm from San Antonio." "That's not an answer." "No, but I'll do it anyway." They moved south along the ridge, descending to the flooded margin of the Merderet, entering the water at a point hidden from the manor by the stone garden wall. The cold hit them again, that same brutal, breathtaking cold, but this time there was no time to react to it. They moved through chest-high water, keeping the wall between themselves and the German position, using the noise of the firefight to mask their movement. 30 meters, 20. The machine gun fired another burst. The Americans returned fire. In the cacophony, Tommy and Heck pulled themselves out of the water on the far side of the garden wall, 10 meters to the side window. The window was shuttered but not closed. The MG-42 muzzle was visible between the shutter slots, the barrel glowing faintly from continuous fire. Tommy pulled his grenade. A grenade through that shutter would do it, but the angle required standing in the open for 3 seconds, and the German position had a sentry at the garden entrance, a soldier with a rifle scanning toward the causeway. Tommy needed Heck to deal with the sentry. Heck needed Tommy to throw first because the sentry would react to the sound of a grenade detonating. They couldn't do both simultaneously. Tommy worked through it. 1 second, 2. The machine gun fired another burst. "I throw. You move the moment it goes. Don't wait for the blast. The second it leaves my hand, you go." Heck nodded. Tommy rose, 3 steps to the corner of the wall. He had a clear line to the shutter. He pulled the pin. He threw. The grenade arced through the dark, passed between the shutter slots, and disappeared into the room. It was the best throw of his life. He had precisely 4 seconds. He dropped. The blast hit like a physical wall. Stone chips, shutter fragments, a tongue of orange light stabbing from the window. The machine gun stopped. In the sudden, shocking silence, not more than half a second, Tommy heard Heck in the sentry, a brief scuffle, the sound that a fight makes when it ends very quickly and very decisively. Then from the causeway, a voice, "Advance! Advance! Advance!" The American paratroopers came across. The machine gun was gone. The causeway was open. 40 men poured through. Tommy pressed himself against the garden wall and watched them come. Men he didn't know, from units he hadn't served with, soldiers who jumped from different planes into different fields, and somehow, through navigation and courage and animal stubbornness, had assembled at this point, at this moment, to take this crossing. They came across at a run. The Germans in the manor returned fire from other positions, but it was disorganized now, reactive, without the anchoring suppression of the machine gun. The Americans moved through it. The manor fell at 04:19 hours. The Fière causeway, the critical crossing point that would allow German armor to drive into the flank of Utah Beach, was in American hands. Heck appeared at Tommy's side. His face was bleeding from a cut across the cheek. His jacket was soaked. Tommy looked at him. Heck looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a long time. They had been in Normandy for 3 hours and 17 minutes. The causeway is taken, but the sun is rising, and what comes with daylight changes everything. Stay with this.
The sun rose over France at 05:58 hours on June 6, 1944. It rose over 156,000 Allied soldiers in the largest seaborne invasion ever executed. It rose over 5 beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword, where landing craft were already grinding onto sand, and men were already dying, and already fighting, and already refusing to stop moving forward, regardless of what the German defensive positions were doing to them. It rose over Sergeant Ray DeLuca, who had landed in a tree 2 kilometers west of La Fière, spent 3 hours working free of his harness, and was currently leading a 6-man ad hoc element that included men from 4 different regiments toward the sound of the fighting at the causeway.
It rose over Corporal James McAllister, who had landed on a farmhouse roof in the village of Sainte-Mère-Église, the very village where American paratroopers had landed directly into a German garrison on alert, and had spent the night hiding in a haystack while the most intense urban combat of the airborne drop unfolded in the streets below him. And it rose over Tommy Caldwell, sitting against the stone wall of the Manoir de la Fière, eating a K-ration cracker, listening to the distant sound of naval bombardment, the USS Nevada, the USS Texas, the British battleships, 17 miles away, delivering 400-pound shells onto German coastal fortifications. A lieutenant appeared before him. "You the man who took out the MG nest?" Tommy looked up. "Me and Morales, sir." The lieutenant looked at Heck, who was asleep, sitting up, rifle across his lap. "What unit?" 505th PIR, 3rd Battalion. Can't tell you which company right now, sir. We've been slightly reorganized by events." The lieutenant almost smiled. "We're all reorganized by events. You're with us now. Get some water. We're going to need that causeway held all day. German armor is going to try to retake it. Every hour matters." Tommy ate his cracker. "Yes, sir." Across the Normandy countryside, scattered over 30 miles, the paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st, 13,000 men who had jumped from 600 aircraft into the controlled nightmare of German-occupied France, were doing what paratroopers are uniquely designed to do. They were fighting in small groups. They were improvising. They were adapting. They were refusing to stop moving. The drop had been a navigational disaster. The scatter pattern had violated every calculated plan. At least a third of all equipment containers had been lost in flooded fields or enemy territory. Entire units had assembled at less than 20% strength. None of it mattered, because the Germans didn't know where they were either. The scattered nature of the drop, the catastrophic failure that had sent men into fields and villages and rivers across a 30-mile radius instead of concentrated on specific drop zones, had created something the German command could not process. Chaos simultaneously from all directions. No coherent front line, no clear avenue of attack to respond to. Just Americans, everywhere, fighting. The 91st Infantry Division, the German unit assigned to respond to the airborne drop, received reports from over 40 different locations simultaneously. They dispatched reserves in multiple directions. They counterattacked empty fields. They responded to phantom attacks created by equipment bundles and burning aircraft. By the time they concentrated any meaningful force against a real American position, the beach landings had begun. By the time they attempted to respond to the beach landings, the paratroopers had cut roads, destroyed bridges, seized crossings, and occupied the key terrain that would have channeled German armor directly into the Allied flank. What looked like disaster had functioned somehow as a kind of terrible genius. The plan had failed. The mission had succeeded. These are not always the same thing. By the end of June 6, 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy had established a foothold on the European continent that would never be relinquished. The numbers tell part of the story. The 82nd Airborne Division suffered casualties of approximately 33% in the first 24 hours. The 101st Airborne, which had jumped simultaneously into the Corentin Peninsula, suffered similar losses. Over 4,000 American paratroopers were killed, wounded, or captured in the opening hours of D-Day. Of the 13,000 men who jumped, fewer than half assembled with their assigned units within the first 6 hours. The rest fought in pickup groups, stranger to stranger, name to name, cricket, click, and whispered passwords, assembling around objectives by instinct and training and the refusal to quit. The La Fière Causeway, the crossing Tommy and Heck helped secure, was counterattacked by German forces repeatedly over the following 2 days. The 82nd Airborne held it. The fighting there, on that 60-meter causeway, is considered by military historians one of the most critical and costly small unit actions of the entire Normandy campaign. Of the paratroopers who died at La Fière, many are buried at the Normandy American Cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer. 9,387 Americans in 172 acres of French soil, given freely and permanently by the people of France to the nation that sent its sons across an ocean to liberate them. What is harder to number is the alternative. If the paratroopers had not jumped, if the airborne component of Overlord had been cancelled, as some commanders argued it should be, the beach landings would have faced unimpeded German armor on their flanks. The exit roads from Utah Beach would have been controlled by intact German infantry. The communications between German units would have remained uncut. The beach landings might still have succeeded. History, with all its contingency and uncertainty, does not offer clean counterfactuals, but the cost would have been unimaginably higher. Tommy Caldwell survived the war. He returned to Harlan County, Kentucky in September 1945. He never spoke at length about Normandy. When pressed by his children, he had 4, he said, "We did what we were supposed to do. Most of us. The ones who didn't, they would have. They just ran out of time." Hector Morales was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, a fragment from a German artillery shell that he carried in his left shoulder for the rest of his life. He became a high school history teacher in San Antonio. He taught for 31 years. He never stopped bringing the D-Day maps to class. Ray DeLuca received the Silver Star for his actions in the hours after the Normandy drop. He was killed at the Battle of the Bulge, December 17, 1944, in Belgium, leading his platoon out of an encirclement. James McAllister made it off the farmhouse roof at dawn on June 6, linked up with a mixed American unit, and fought through Normandy, Holland, and Germany. He went back to Aberdeen after the war and became a fisherman. He died in 1987. His family found a cricket, a small metal clicker, in the pocket of his old uniform. They didn't know what it was. 1 click. 2 clicks back. Friend. The men who jumped into Normandy on the night of June 5th, 6th, 1944, did not know they were making history. They knew they were doing a job in conditions that had immediately and catastrophically deviated from every plan, against an enemy that was alert and armed and fighting for occupied ground they considered their own. They did it anyway. Not because they weren't afraid. The water, the dark, the wrong drop zone, the missing unit, the patrol with the flashlights, every one of those men was afraid. Fear is not the absence of courage. Fear is the thing that makes courage visible. You can only be brave about something that scares you. They were paratroopers. They had volunteered to be dropped into the dark. They had done it knowing the plan might fail, knowing the flak might be bad, knowing the drop zones might be off, knowing that once they were on the ground, they would be behind enemy lines with whatever they carried and whatever they could find. They volunteered anyway. The crickets clicked in the darkness of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Small metal sounds, barely audible above the gunfire and the planes and the sea. Friend, friend, I am here. I am here. 80 years later, those sounds still echo. The sky was full of Americans. The Germans never saw it coming. The world was never the same.